So we'll start as a child, I was raised Catholic,
Okay.
and I'm Cajun French, and most of us are Catholics there in Louisiana, in South Louisiana. And I did communion. I had no traumas in the Catholic religion, a little bit of like lowercase t traumas that I
Hmm.
call, just some stuff that happened at catechism when I was asked what I wanted to be when I grow up, and I said a priest. And the nun told me, "You can't be a priest." And I thought, why not?
Yeah.
And she said, "Because you're a girl." Like, it had never occurred to me that I'd only seen male priests. Like, that just wasn't a thing. It was like, I want to serve God. So
Mm,
what better way to do that than to be a priest? I'm going to go all the way up there, right? That's how I saw it as a child.
yeah.
And so there was just like that's a little t traumatizing. And so you then go, well, I can only be a nun. I can only go as high up as a nun. I'll never be a priest.
Mm.
And so that was an odd kind of bag to carry around. But from there, I left the church and did a lot of teenage experimenting, and had a lot of fun, but all dark and you know ultimately not healthy. And after my 20s, I found myself, this is about 13 years ago, I guess. I found myself in a Baptist church,
Mm.
and they were doing baptisms there. And my sister said, I'm getting baptized. The whole family's getting baptized. Do you want to get baptized? And I said, okay, yeah. So I got baptized. I really didn't know what it meant. I really didn't know how it would impact my life, but it did. It made a huge difference in my life. And I never knew that, like, looking back, getting ready for this podcast, I kind of laid everything out. Like, how did this go down? How were things? There was like this
Mm.
Baptist church. Getting baptized was the catalyst for everything else that followed in my faith and
Really?
in my awakening. Yeah. And so that was 13 years ago. And about 11 years ago, I surrendered. And I'm not going to get into my surrender story because that was over a pile of laundry, which sounds so silly. But I
Well,
get,
for the record, I love that.
yeah,
Even you just telling me that, I'm so intrigued by it. No pressure, obviously, to share
no
any
pressure. Yeah.
what you do or don't want to, but that is super intriguing to me. 'Cause
Right. Over a
yeah.
pile of laundry. Yeah. I was brought to my core and my being, and everything opened up, and I surrendered everything over to him.
Can I
I
ask
say
you?
him.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I'm totally fine with that language, and that's part of the whole idea of like reconstruction is being able to even use old language and know other, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Language
Right.
is just images that help us point to bigger things and such. So we know that God is not an actual guy in the sky, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm totally cool with using he. Um, but if you don't mind me asking, like, what was some of the dynamic happening in your heart or around that season of time? Because to me, I'm really interested in stories of people having some sort of surrender experience or any sort of like spiritual transcendent experience in very what is seemingly mundane and monotonous tasks, because that tells me that there's something else that's really happening uh, that has preceded that moment. Maybe not always, but it's not as common to hear that. It's more common to say I was at a Hillsong worship thing, like
Yeah.
more like you over laundry. There's not any emotional manipulation. There's not a setting that was
Mm-mm.
crafted in some room with people in a green room praying for you to have that experience. Like you're
Well,
doing life. So
yeah.
what was around that?
So some of that is, I had at church often when they'd say, come down and give it over to God, and let's claim the faith now in front of everyone. I am an introvert all the way through.
Really?
Yes, and I'm extremely shy. And I knew I wanted to go up there because I wanted to make this calling, but I couldn't get my body to do it. And so I think it was moving before. So good for those people who surrender at a Hillsong worship,
Right.
and good for them, you know, for being so brave. But for me, it took. I had a pile of laundry that I there was okay. So long story short, I just had my second daughter, and she's autistic, and she was, I think, 6 months old ish around that time, and just when she was starting to have her neurological issues, and I was spent,
Mm.
just spent, and there was a pile of laundry that needed to get folded, and I knew that I didn't have it in me to fold the laundry. It was like I was at my lowest rock bottom point, and that I surrendered everything over, just saying, Lord, I need you to carry me through this world. I can't do this. I have been doing this by myself since, like, at 14 was when I went a little wild and did my own thing. It was like, I got this. Don't worry about it, God. Like, I got it all figured out now at 14. And yeah, so it was the pile of laundry that did it for me, and I just couldn't. I didn't have any more in me on my own. I needed to be carried for a while, and that was the prayer, and that was the moment. And I was a ball of mess, like just crying, and I need you in my life. Please, please let me in, and just knocking on the door,
Hmm.
essentially. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, by the way. I didn't know the terminology. I didn't even know that was a surrender moment.
Yeah.
All I
Yeah.
knew was that I didn't want to do life without God at my center
Mm.
anymore. And so from there, weird things started happening. Like, I got a couple of books. I got an Eckhart Tolle book that
Yeah.
said The Power of Now.
Hmm.
And while washing dishes, he said to run your hands through the water and be present with the water and feel the water. And then it occurred to me I hadn't felt the water in years, like
Mm.
since being a kid, because I was just busy with my kids at this
Yeah.
point. And although you grow and have children of your own, your soul is still so young,
Yeah.
you know. And I wasn't extremely wise then. I'd say that too.
Mm.
So anyway, having that open my eyes a little bit to, wait, maybe there's something else in this world, or maybe there is a little magic in this world that I always thought was there, but just couldn't find it.
Yeah.
All the other times that I had sought out quote unquote magic things in the world were like as a teenager, or after 14, after I, kind of, left prayer life and just went my own way. I looked into things like tarot cards and
Yeah.
uh, psychics. Like I went
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
psychic in Houston, and
Really?
yeah, this guy, they call him Uncle. That was such a weird experience. Anyway, so but I had friends that kind of led me in that direction. Friends of no background in faith, and no worship, practice. And I think to some degree, where I'm at now with my faith is, I think that I was always searching, just seeking. And,
Mm.
I knew it was there. I just couldn't find the door. And what was so dumb was that I only needed to be still. That was it.
Mm.
That was the whole thing. I just needed to sit and feel the water
Yeah.
one day.
Yeah.
So that little break in my armor allowed some light to get in.
Mm.
And then from there, um, my life just, changed in, such dramatic ways. Like I met I wasn't married at the time. I had two kids, had never been married. I met my husband soon after that. He and I got married, which I didn't know I was going to do that. We got married, and we did have a miscarriage. So I'm not saying my whole life was just rainbows and sunshine. Like, we had some trials, but after meeting him, I had my son. And because of my son, I had a lot of time on my hands, and I joined a Bible study.
Yeah.
And
So
and
you were
then
involved in a church already, or did you seek out the Bible study? Like, were you already involved in a place?
so remember, I'd gotten baptized in the Baptist tradition in the
Yeah.
church, but that was, yeah. So now here I am, I'm in my 30s, and I'm living in Texas now at this point. And I'm attending a Baptist church. My husband doesn't like it. He wants to go to a different one. So I start going to a Methodist church with him. He does come to find out he doesn't like this church either, but
Yeah.
whatever. I was tired of church hopping. I just wanted some place to go to pray,
Yeah.
And I hadn't had a love affair with God yet. I still wasn't there. And I joined a Bible study, and they talked about the Christian meditation. I forget, Luxina, how do you say
Lectio
it?
Divina.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
that.
What church was
And
talking about? The Methodist church.
my Methodist
Okay,
church.
not the Baptist church though. I don't know that
No,
they. Okay.
no. So I was like, what? You guys can meditate? I thought that was of the devil. I didn't know we could do that. And then they said, yeah, it's Christian. You can meditate. And I'm thinking, yes, because I always wanted to try it,
Yeah.
but I just resisted because I was told it wasn't something you do.
Right. Right.
So I start meditating, and everything gets wide open. I
Yeah.
mean,
Talk to me about that. Like,
well,
what was
okay.
some of the early meditation? Like, did they teach you like just simple mindfulness meditation, or like what was some of the, or was
So
it?
we did this guided meditation. It was through a YouTube video, and the lady talked, and then she would ask questions, and it was like, okay, you're in the courtyard where Jesus is walking through, and the images, the lady that touches his robe and gets healed because she had such great faith, and like,
Mhm.
if you could touch his robe and say one thing to him, what would it be? And the thing I wanted to say with him was, could I go with you? Can
Mm,
I go with you? It's like it always chokes me up every time I talk about this. But
mm,
so for me, I wanted nothing more than to be led. And I realize that now. I didn't realize that then. I thought what I was saying was I was unhappy where
mm,
I was, maybe, or, I had no idea what anything. And this continues to be something about my deconstruction. And if anybody else is like this, I just want you to know it's okay. I will have a question that will linger sometimes for a year even. And then when the answer comes, I know instantly what it was talking about. Like, I
mm.
know it in my core, and I know it in my being, and I know exactly what that was. But after I started meditation, um, the church got, so I'm still doing these Bible studies. Well, I start going to like Bible studies with men, Bible studies with older ladies, Bible studies with anybody who had an interesting Bible study. I was doing it.
Yeah.
So my group of gals my age were all doing the same Bible studies together because they were building a network and a relationship. I was building a network and a relationship through the word. So
Mm,
my friend was this journey.
mm.
And in the process, I did lose, a lot of friends because they didn't really understand. Well, why are you taking Bible study on a Thursday? We meet on Tuesday. It was stuff like,
Wow. So funny, the stuff that the little politics inside of churches, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
it's so funny. And so I took a Bible study with some older ladies, and they were like, I said, I hope that you guys can show me some wisdom because you've been through a lot, and they said, this is funny. They said, honey, if we had any wisdom, we've already forgotten it. Because they're like in their 80s.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical. I love the Texas thing too. I
Yeah.
like, you know.
Honey,
I could
Yeah.
just see it in my head, which Texas, by the way, I mean, it's the hot topic right now. Won't go there. I'm in San Diego, and in California, everybody's heading to Texas. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry. We're
Austin, mostly
flooding.
Austin.
Yep.
I
Yep.
know. I know. I heard Rogan say on his podcast, don't bring your leftist politics here. I'm like, okay, all right. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
don't get into politics, so yeah,
yeah,
that's not a hot topic
nor do
for
I,
me.
nor do I. So I'm curious, like in those Bible studies, like, because for a lot of people where it gets either A, they get hung up on, or B, they get something happens within them where they get into the word, they get into the scriptures, but something then changes whenever the old cliche of it goes from the head to the heart, right? But there really is something that happens there where we go
Yeah.
from understanding something or understanding scripture, and then the heart becomes awake, and then it becomes a new lens now for the mind to intake
Right.
the word. So I'm curious on your journey, and I'm trying to put together too, like where the like the timeline of this is too, like where did it begin to become more, if it's, correct me, more of transcendent for you, more real, experiential, from just pursuing the Bible studies, or were you experiencing that through those Bible studies?
No. Well, okay, so I was getting some things were happening. So my heart space was opening, which at the same time I got into Jordan Peterson quite a bit, and I was reading
Hmm.
his work. And he has a personality test on his website, and I took it, and I got in the 90th percentile for politeness, and two, a two, not even 2%, a two in compassion.
Yeah.
How are you a Christian with no compassion?
Yeah.
Like, how does that even happen? Obviously, something was not getting through, right?
Mm,
And so I did go to a Christian counselor. We kind of talked through this, and but so many people were in denial over this. Like, you have compassion. I've seen you. You're a greeter at church, for goodness sakes. You're
right.
holding the door open. I'm like, that's me being polite, though.
Mm,
And anyway, so that was happening, but my love affair with the scripture and with God was growing so strong that it was like emitting from me.
mm.
People told me it looked like I was glowing, and I joke and say I was pregnant because there was no way I was pregnant, like none. And they're like, okay, whatever. But I remember being so happy to go to church, like so excited, and then I get there and everybody was like humdrum, like,
Right.
oh, going to church. And then I'm looking around a room of what felt like zombies, and I'm like, why are you not so excited? We get to praise. Like,
Yeah.
don't you understand? We get to praise today with each
Yeah.
other. And I know it sounds silly, but that was something that clued me in. Like, hey, something's happening within you. Like, something's different. Like,
Mm,
this isn't what other people are experiencing. But I was also having red flags going up, which is part of my deconstruction. Like, I worked the front desk too on the Sunday service, and they were asking me to sell merchandise one week, and I was like, I told the girl, I said, I can't do this. And she
mm,
said, why not? And I said, well, this is the only reason Jesus got mad. Why would I do this? Like, it's
mm.
literally the only thing we ever see was like him getting mad because they were selling stuff at the temple. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm going to show you. It's scripture. Like, we can't do this. I'm like whispering, like, we're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
But anyway, so she did end up, and thankfully she did talk to somebody, and she found it, looked it up, and was like, yeah, she's right. Like, we can't do this.
Mm,
And the pastor was like, no, that's about selling sacrificial things for sacrifice in the Bible. So, okay, I had a red flag. My feelings weren't really um they didn't really go away with him saying that that was his interpretation of it versus my interpretation of it. But I was okay. Like, okay, well, I just ignored that flag. And then one day in Bible study, one of the older ladies was saying how because we're Christ followers, we get into heaven. And isn't that wonderful? And just started laughing.
Mm,
And I was breaking on the inside, thinking
mm,
that my Muslim neighbor, who had just given me this beautiful basket of all her cultures, religious, she was celebrating a holiday. I forget which holiday it was, but my heart was shattering. And so,
mm.
which it always bothered me when they would say things like, well, Buddhists aren't going to heaven. They're just
Right.
not. Okay, Jessica, get over it. They're just not.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you even saying right now?
Yeah.
So that was another red flag that went up. And so a lot of things were happening at that time. I actually got diagnosed with breast cancer, and that
Mm.
came to me prophetically, which that's a different podcast. This is like
Oh man.
prophecy and people who have prophetic visions and stuff like that. Like that's a whole nother thing. But I
Well,
do
we're
have
gonna have to
prophetic.
talk about that again, by the way, because that's something that's resurfaced in my life as in through my reconstruction. So
Yeah. Okay,
yes,
good.
I'm super interested
Good.
in that. So
Yeah, so I have prophetic dreams. I don't like have prophecy just hanging out with people, but I'll have a dream.
can I do you and tell me not I no harm no foul. Can I read your story that you posted about your dreams about
Oh,
or
yeah,
so so you say you have like prophetic stuff in dreams. Okay.
yeah.
So just so
Sometimes profound, even.
yeah, absolutely. But it was like you don't mind I just want listeners
No,
that
no, no. Go ahead.
so
It's
this is
funny.
Jessica's not lying to you, friends. She says sometimes my dreams are profound. Am I clicking here? Whoops. I don't know. Sometimes my dreams are profound, like soaring through the cosmos with the realization that I could do this all the time if I wanted. Yet other times, like last night, I dreamt I was in love with a man who had butter tortilla hands, and I used a pizza cutter to give him fingers, and we laughed at dumb jokes while we waited for something. I forget what. Waiting myself up, laughing even harder, which I remember now. Okay,
Yeah.
that is hysterical. I read that and legitimately laughed out loud. I was like, but so if you can't like so, did that start happening as you were going through this sort of awakening? Like is that something that was always there or a
I,
gift you feel like that's
okay.
been deposited?
Yeah. So it was a gift that's been deposited, but it's hereditary. In the Cajun tradition, we have people that are called treaters, or they call them traiteurs in French, but the treater. And my grandmother was one of these women, and she would treat for heat stroke because in the day that was very important. We worked on a farm and we had a garden, and my dad would bring us. All our food came from the garden, so my dad would bring us over to my grandma's house to get treated. But she would essentially lay hands on us, and she would say the Lord's Prayer in French over
Mm,
us. And that's
wow.
what was happening. And I didn't know that till I was older, what she was doing. I thought she was putting magic spells on it. I had no idea what was happening, you know?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know the words for anything. And so it's that is passed on to each middle daughter. You're supposed to be the treater of the family. And I'm the middle daughter. So
Mm,
of mother's children of my yeah so but my grandmother had Alzheimer's and gave her treater prayers over to my aunt, who is her middle daughter. And then my aunt gave them to my brother. So I tease him and say he's the middle daughter now. But laying hands and praying and that those types of things aren't foreign to me.
yeah.
And it's not foreign in a lot of cultures, honestly. These things are
Yeah. So was that reawakened in some way as of you said 11 years, 13 years that you've been, or was that even in the time prior to that? Like, I'm
prior.
curious, really. So
I
it's
had,
always been
yeah,
there.
it's always been there, but I didn't know what it was called or why I did it. And honestly, when I was past the age of 14, the only way I would do it, and it would come over me in my waking time, but if I had alcohol, like if I were
Hmm.
drinking, and I would just start telling people stuff sometimes. And like this happened to me recently. I went to a party, and I had had a couple of glasses of wine, which I know you're not supposed to do, only one glass, but I had had more than one.
I don't know where
And I
you
was
found
talking to,
that rule because I don't listen to that one.
so I was talking to someone, and he's precious. He's my sister's friend, and he wears like super thick eyelashes, and he was giving me some of his perfume. Anyway, we were chatting, and as he's talking to me, I said, "Wait, did you get that from your grandmother?" And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Did your grandma, she raised you?" And he was like, "Wait, I didn't tell you that." And I'm like, "Oh," like, because it came onto me as like,
Yeah.
this is factual. This is just something I know about you.
Yeah.
And but me mentioning it scared him a little bit. But stuff like that'll happen if I'm drinking. I'll say weird stuff like that where people are like, "Hold up, wait, what?" But
Yeah.
I don't I try not to label that because I the more I think about that, I think the only reason that happens is because my brain is shut off a little bit. Like I'm not overthinking.
Mm.
Just like when I'm asleep, my brain, the part of the logical side of me is not overthinking, and I'm not, because I do have a tendency to overthink and not relax in the
Yeah.
moment unless I'm trying to, you know.
Right.
But the prophecy thing with my breast cancer was the dream that I had. But I also had a kid say to my son, he said, "Miss Jessica has breast cancer." He said that to my son, and I
Really?
overheard, and my entire body tightened, and I
Mm.
was angry. It wasn't really angry, wasn't isn't the right word, but like I had an energy and a physical response to that.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was like the second time. So I'd had this dream about snakes. It was, 8 snakes, and my neighbor took the head off of the snake and said it can't hurt you anymore. And then when I, realized that 1 in 8 women get breast cancer, that snake being the breast cancer. And anyway, that dream
Wow.
made a lot more sense to me. And then the third time I heard breast cancer was, we were putting together our vision boards for the year at my friend's house. It's her thing. She wanted to do it. So I just went along because I love her. And I was going through a magazine and I couldn't really find anything. So, but I'm looking, and then I saw a Susan G. Komen ad that said, "Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it's not there." And because of the little boy who said that to my son, and then my
Mm.
dream, I had that night, the night before, I had checked, and I'm like, I don't have anything. I don't have a lump. I'm fine. Like, Jessica, your mind, you're overthinking
Yeah.
again. And that's what that ad said. Just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it's not there. And so I
Mm.
said, "Oh heck, that's something." So I made an appointment. Sure enough, I had it, and I was meditating every day. At that time, I don't think I would have gotten the messages had I not been meditating
Mm.
as much as I was. I
Yeah.
honestly don't. I think something about meditation puts you in connection um, to a higher source.
Totally.
That's it. That's all I can say about that. And um, anyway, I got checked, and I went. The first doctor I went to, I told my husband, I said, "I don't feel God here,"
Mm.
and he said, "Okay, we don't have to stay." And I'm like, "All right," because he knows. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm not comfortable, I'm not staying. So we left, and
I
then
love that intuition that you have, by the way, about that. Like following
well,
that's important.
so Richard Rohr has a theory about intuition, and in our heart space, when we reach our second half of life, it's our intuition that gets stronger, and that's the part that we're supposed to rely on. And that's a Carl Jung thing. That
Yes.
comes from Carl Jung.
Yep.
So anyway, so I was getting messages to do nothing. to do nothing. And I'm like, what the heck is that? So I reached out to my pastor and I said, I know God told me to do nothing. I don't know what to do. Can me and my husband come in and just talk to you about this? Because I really could use some spiritual guidance. And he said, if you're getting a message to do nothing, it's the devil. It isn't God. Go to a doctor. And like basically that.
Wow.
And, but I mean, probably a little more elegant than the way I'm saying it, but it
Sure.
hit me that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it hurt my feelings, but then come to find out, do nothing was all I needed to do.
Yeah.
I literally did nothing. Someone sent me a message, a random stranger who said, hey, I know a friend of yours who said you have cancer, but I live up the road from you and I had cancer. And it was this type, exactly the kind I ended up having, which I
Really?
didn't even know what kind I had at that point. Exactly the stage that I had, which I didn't know I had stage 0 at that point. I didn't know any of that. And she said, this is the doctor I used. I really liked her. So I called, made an appointment, went to see her. She said, do you mind if I pray with you? Shut the door right there. I'm like,
Wow.
you're my doctor.
Yeah.
We're proceeding. Let's do this. And then she told me I had stage 0 and it was ductal. And it wasn't the kind that you would have felt at the lump. It doesn't make a lump. It's inside the ducts. So that magazine picture was 100% right. It was like, just because you don't feel it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
And you know, they must have thought I was a lunatic when I got my medical results, and they're like, hey, you have cancer. I'm like, okay, thank you, y'all have a good day,
Yeah.
whatever, because I had already processed it. It
Yeah.
had been
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
He already told me I had it when he had me go, you
Yeah.
know, so I didn't, you know, so they were like, okay.
Yeah. They're not used to that response.
No, they were probably like, thank goodness. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so that was that upset me with the church, you know, and I felt like, oh man, you know, what do I don't have an elder to go to, even though I'm in these Bible studies with older people who have forgotten all their wisdom.
Right.
And I can't ask my pastor anything because he doesn't want to deal with me. And so I was just really lost during that time. And come to find out, my poor pastor, poor thing, he was struggling. His life was falling apart. His marriage was breaking up over lies that he had told, and things caught up to him finally. And he had founded that church, and he ended up leaving the church not very long after this whole situation. So
Oh, wow.
he couldn't help me because he was not in any position to help anyone else. His cup was empty.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when he started leaving the church, a lot of people were leaving the church, and they were asking if I was going to leave the church. And I was like thinking about it, you know, like, I don't know if I'm going to leave the church. Maybe I should go check out some other churches. I didn't really search too hard, and, you know, that kind of thing. And my daughter who had just gotten diagnosed with autism, she's 11. She was 11. Then we went to the mall and we were waiting for her appointment. We had extra time because I always arrive early. And there was a guy there doing a podcast sermon. And I said, let's listen to him for a second. And his whole sermon was, don't forget the blessings of the church. And he just kept saying that over and over. And I immediately, this is the point where my heart space is just so open. I cry at a drop of a hat. Like every time God talks to me, I just start crying. Like you can't even deal with me at this point. Like as soon as God talks, I'm done. I'm a puddle. Bye.
Yeah.
You know? So, and I'm not a crier. Like growing up, I'm, you know, pretty strong. I'm just not a crier. I don't even watch sappy love shows. And I'm, you know, I joke that I'm more of a dude. I am. I do woodworking. I'd prefer to watch woodworking videos than, you know, This Is Us, you know? So I just don't, I wasn't like that before, which lends to the part of me not being very compassionate. It makes sense. Like if that heart space isn't open, you're not going to be truly compassionate. You
Yeah.
might think that what you're doing is compassion, but it isn't.
Mm.
And so he said, don't forget the blessings of the church. And I'm like, okay, I'll keep going to church. And one day after service, my friend was like, let's go get free food. The women's group is giving free food. And I don't associate with the groups that much because, again, I'm an introvert. I don't really go to these things. And I said, okay, well, I'll go with you. Since she and I led a Bible study together, we were like already a part of the women's group. So we go and get food and we're walking out, and there is a man who walks up to me as we're leaving to go home, and he has no shoes on. He's bleeding. He's got blood all over him.
Mm.
Um, his shirt is kind of ripped. He looks awful. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, these were his words. "I know y'all told me to leave, but I truly don't have anywhere to go. And I really need some help." And he just starts crying. And I'm in my Sunday clothes, so I look in juxtaposition of him and the way that he looked. It must have looked so odd. I look
Mm.
at it like from an artist's eye, like how that must have looked.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh no," because I'm like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
I immediately go into, "Who told you that?" Like,
Yeah.
and so I bring him inside, like I'm dragging him inside, and I'm like, show me who told you that. That is
Yeah.
not who we are, And so we go in and we find that it was the security guard had told him that there was nothing we could do, he said. And then he tells me, "We don't have any policies for stuff like this. We don't have policies in place." I said, "That's a hospital next door. People are going to come here for help. We need
Yeah.
to institute some policies." So, I mean, long story short, the guy his name was Brent. He had went on a bender. He was a recovering alcoholic. He had a bad moment in time. He ended up getting robbed, beaten up, and drugged to Cypress, Texas, and he's from another area of town. And he just needed a ride to his sponsor's house, which is the story he told me. And I believe him. I mean, why would he lie? And so he said, "I don't have my car. They stole my car. They stole my wallet. They stole my phone. I don't have any way to get home." And I was like, "Let me call you an Uber. Like, how hard is that?" So that was all that happened with Brent. And from there, I just began the even further deconstruction, because I'm
Mhm.
like, are we reading the same book?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd go to the other Bible study leaders. The women's group was meeting that Sunday. And so I asked them, and this one lady took me aside. She actually has been very helpful to me in my faith. And she took me aside and said, "Hey, this has happened to me at church too,
Mm.
a couple of times." And she said, "So what we did was we helped personally. Like," she said, "me and my husband like brought the girl to a hotel, put her up, and made sure her family came to get her, and like some things that had happened." And so I actually talked to the women's group, and they were supposed to have set up policies for this type of thing. Whether or not they did, I'm not sure. With COVID, it's been such a cluster. Like, we
Right.
haven't been able to go and attend church. And I'm still able to go to church, and I use it as time of worship. And we have a new pastor now. Our pastor is unique in a sense that he actually preaches from the pulpit barefoot, because he said he wants to be more grounded and
Mm.
connected. And I think that's kind of cool. Like,
How is that
and
being?
I'm
I mean, because even
received,
using, yeah,
not
how,
well.
right? Because that language in church, and that's kind of what I want to ask you about too. Is like, I was on staff at a church, my dad's church, and supposed to be the successor of that and everything. And so I remember just being on staff, or even like being the pastor on duty for a day. Like Thursdays were my pastor on duty days, pod days. And we would have all sorts of people come through, and you were the guy that had to, or we had, like, I mean, I come from a church tradition that ordains women too. So myself, you were the guy or the lady that would take care of it. And so I've had plenty of folks like that stroll through. And we have people in the church that step up and help and that take ownership like you, and it's amazing. But then there's a whole nother level of that when people start to take ownership over like their own theology and their own practice and spirituality. Like there's like two types of independent folks, it seems like, in church. It's like either the people that like rise to the occasion to like put people up in a hotel, and then the other people that like question and really take autonomy in theology that may not exactly mirror where it's at, but they find community there. And it sounds like you have a little bit of both of that
Mhm.
going on. And
Yeah.
I'm curious how some of your spiritual experience, your deconstruction, and then ultimately too, like any sort of like reconstructed sort of faith. That's something that I really want to get people's opinion on, because a lot of people deconstruct from faith and they don't even stick into church like how you have been, still willing and able to kind of, read between the lines, if you will. Some people just, that's it, whatever, Christianity's done. And that's kind of the route I went for a while.
Mhm.
And then found myself back into faith and even embracing the term Christianity, and now church planting again and doing all this stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and so I'm just curious how that's been received, but also too, like, so have you connected with this pastor in a new and refreshed way? Like, and how did it be that they are able to incorporate that? Like, is the church taking a, a shift at large because people are using language like grounded from the pulpit? Like, how is all of that and your
Right.
influence in shaping the culture of your church experience?
Right. So that church is so unique. I would say even the pastor before, he would have us do a moment of meditation for a
Really?
while. Yeah. So he was
Is this still the
moving
Methodist church?
the Methodist, the same
Okay.
Methodist
Okay.
church. Odd, just odd. We're supposed to have a group of elders on stage and they kind of give us their opinions differently. But the way this church, it was just the one pastor, and then they had a guy coming up under him.
Hmm.
And so now we have the new pastor who takes his shoes off. And I have a friend who's 86. Her ancestors are Sam Houston. She
Mm.
does not like it at all. At all. She just can't get over that and does not care for that and wishes he would present himself better. And I understand her side too. Because I come from a Catholic tradition, I understand that
Yeah.
the reverence behind it should be there also.
Hmm.
Like, understand that you should humble yourself when you come through these doors and like present yourself to God in a humble way. And not lowly way, like not
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm so poor and humble,
Right.
but humble yourself, that you're nothing without God.
Yeah, that
And
reverence. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, that's the word. And so I understand where she comes from. And then, and this new pastor that we have, he does his best to speak to first starting out Christians and the older Christians. He really does try to incorporate both you know parts of your life, but you just can't. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know, you're a pastor, so you just can't speak to both. Okay, think about Jesus, the way he had to speak in parables,
Right.
because it hits you on the level where your ears can hear,
Hmm.
and where your brain can take it in, and where your heart space is open enough to get it.
Yeah.
And so when I read scripture from like a psychological level, like when I look at the scripture that way, or if I look at the scripture from a philosophical level, it's all different and it all comes in through the filter of a different perspective. Like, you could hear something like, don't give pearls to pigs. And then you think that that means I'm not going to talk to
Right.
certain type of people, you
Yep.
know? So that's one way of hearing it. And then there is another way of hearing it,
Yeah.
so, or there's several, honestly. So like,
Totally.
as you reconstruct, you start to realize that, it's like when it says don't grow weary doing good deeds. I used to think that that meant don't get weary, doing Bible studies, which it certainly did mean that for me for a long time. But now when I hear don't grow weary doing good deeds, the good deeds is the work, the path, stay
Yeah.
the path. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
that changed, so the information is the same. It's the same words. It's just it's coming through to a deeper level of the soul. It's less superficial. And
Hmm.
I think for us as deconstructors, you can't forget the blessings of the church. You
Mm.
just,
Yeah. Can you
and that
talk
was,
more about that? Like how that's been made like tangible for you? Because I think that's a lot of people there. They do struggle with that. They do struggle with, and it's natural when we feel hurt in some way to
mhm,
only associate, like Richard Rohr talks about, the neuroscience behind negative and positive, how like negative things are more like Velcro, and positive things, they're actually more like slippery in the mind. So that's why
mhm.
you have to hold it in your mind for 10 seconds for it to actually get into the fabric, but negative things are stick on. And I think people's bad experiences, like a lot of folks, just with the experience that you had with having to sell things at the table, boom, people would have been done and gone
Yeah,
and
yeah,
hurt for a long time. But it sounds like you have a particular resilience, not to discount the folks that maybe have been hurt in that sort of way, but um,
yeah.
how is
Trauma with a,
the,
sorry, yeah,
yes.
trauma with a capital T versus trauma with a small t. So if you've been traumatized by the church with a capital T, like something terrible has happened to you, like coming from a Catholic perspective, and I have a gay daughter,
Mhm.
it's difficult for me to understand hateful things at a church level. But I think the Brent experience, when he showed up without shoes on, and I was the only one who could see him, and I
Mm.
was the only one willing to help him. And because literally, my friend came out with me, she never saw him. She's like, I went out the same time you did. How come I didn't see him? It's a question she's asked herself as a follower. Like, God, why didn't you present him to me? I would have helped him, in
Mm.
that kind of space too. So I think contemplation is important, and that was the first thing I said when we were talking. You can contemplate something and not have an answer for it for years, even,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
weeks. And then sometimes someone will tell you something and it's not meant for you, and then weeks later someone will mention it and you're like, that was for them. That's
yeah,
why that person told me that. And then you can give them the scripture and lead them to the answer of why that was mentioned to you in the first place.
yeah.
And so the blessings of the church thing, for me, I he was God was right when he said it the way he said it, because without the church, without a place to go to even hear scripture daily and to build a discipline,
Mm.
um, which I think is so important in your faith journey, a discipline of any kind,
Yes,
discipline of
yes.
meditation, a discipline of being in the word. And for me, that started with the discipline of going to church every Sunday, no matter what church it was, no matter if I was traveling, who I was with, I went to church every single Sunday for years. And so that discipline brought me a heart on fire.
Mm.
And you can't run away from a heart on fire.
Mm. Yeah.
You just will never. So there is what's his name, Tim Finley, is that the guy's name that's doing the study? Do you listen to that podcast, the what is it, the oh shoot, I have it written down here
Is it
too
the
somewhere.
Turning to the Mystics one?
Yes,
Yeah.
Turning to the Mystics, where they're
Uh-huh.
doing the Teresa
Of a
Avila.
yes.
Yes, her book on the different castles. And so it's all just different stages in our spiritual development. And so without the church, I would have looked at that picture of Jesus holding, with the heart
Yeah.
open, with the flames shooting from it, from the Catholic perspective, like, oh, that's just Jesus. That's his heart for people, and that's not it. Like,
Yeah.
I know what that means now.
Mm.
Like, that means something very different to me now.
Yeah.
And because I had my heart just out and on
Mm.
fire and exposed for months and months and months. And when that happened to Brent, when I realized that the church that I attended, no one wanted to help him, it broke me.
Yeah.
I'm I'm not going to say that wouldn't have turned people away. My husband even said, I wouldn't blame you if you left the church and went somewhere else. And, but I have a really, really weird church. Like there's a guy in my Sunday school, his name is Rob. And he just like a couple weeks ago gave me a Ram Dass book. I'm like, dude, I love Ram
Really?
Dass. Like,
That's so
yeah.
awesome. So okay. So in reconstructing faith, where did you get to the point where you were able to, have you always been open to just reading that from any, because I did another conversation this morning with a friend who, new friend, he responded as well. And just like, there comes to a point where you then like give yourself permission to be able to read the things and do the
Yeah.
things that you're not supposed to do, or that were, taboo, like, was that ever taboo for you? Or at what point were you able to read from different perspectives while still holding a Christian lens?
So taboo isn't the word. The word is scared to death.
Yeah.
Scared to death.
Yeah.
And so I got to a point where I was so afraid. But then you listen to Christian songs and they're saying fear is a liar. And so like these things all seep in. And so I'm like, okay, God, if fear is a liar and I'm fearful to listen to Muji and do a guided meditation with Muji.
I love Muji. So
Muji's
awesome.
the best.
Yes, right? This like Jamaican guy that lives in France or whatever, or Spain, or I don't know where he's at, but
like Dominican Republic. Yeah, yes. No, why would I be scared to listen to him? But I was. There's also this other guy, he's Canadian. He's got a YouTube channel called Enlightenment. And he's got Tibetan throat singing at the beginning of his YouTube videos.
Really?
And I'm like, ooh, I can't listen to this guy because I don't know what they're saying. They might be planting some seeds in there.
Yeah.
So fearful everywhere I went.
Yeah.
And so no, I wasn't open to reading Ram Dass, but I also realized in those broken moments of the church that I was with a bunch of broken people, and I needed to listen and follow people who had gone on the journey before me. And I wasn't going to find it at my church. I just wasn't, and so I sought out spiritual teachers. The first time I heard the word mystic, turning to the mystics, and if you ever listen to this podcast, they're the most gentle, precious people in the world.
I know, yes.
I was terrified that the
How
word
long
mystic.
ago is this? That where you're like the term mystic? Like, how long ago? I'm curious.
I don't know, but it was. Okay. I don't remember. Maybe a year, maybe two.
Okay.
I don't know. The time is, but
so what was that like approaching that language?
So approaching it was scary. I had to surrender. So the whole thing is a surrendering. It's a process, right? The process is surrender, learn, practice, and then a death of something. And then the surrender, the learning, the practice, and the death of something. And it's like over and over and over again. And I think I've always been able to spot little patterns like that in my life. And so I just started to realize, hold up, I'm in this stage. So if I give this up, then I can move forward and be in this stage. And sometimes I'm in a desert for a really long time. Like I'm in the middle of one of my deserts. And that's what I call like the stage of learning, where I'm just getting information from a bunch of different sources and I'm filtering it out, like what is valuable and what isn't.
Yes. And that's the whole idea of like this spiritual nomad thing that I started years ago, is because it's like, that's what it felt like, like I'm just nomading in a desert place, and whoever I think might have some wisdom, I'll pull that in, filter through it, see what sticks. And a big part of that too is, Jesus says that the Spirit of truth will guide you into all truth. And I remember having conversations with my dad about some of this, and he was definitely felt like I was on a major slippery slope, you know. I'm like, well, the slippery slopes are so much fun. You ever been skiing before? You know, it's like, it's a great time, you know? And so it's just through that learning and exploring and on a slippery slope, you have to, you begin to filter through all of that, and you begin to see like what is, if God, if I trust that the Holy Spirit is alive and well and leading and guiding, then that is going to be the thing that I have to follow and pursue, regardless if it seems weird or has, you know, singing bowls or not, or what. Like, I just
Yeah.
have to follow that. And if I'm going to be true to be a Christian, I got to listen to the words of Jesus. And Jesus told me to trust the Spirit of truth that's going to lead me into all truth. And,
Right.
but, and that's what sparked these whole conversations that I'm doing, is I followed a cool, trendy pastor who is basically telling people that, who are deconstruction or ex-evangelical people, that they're, you know, that it's a result of poor discipleship, you know, or is something,
Yeah.
you know. And it's like, I'm just like, man, I have to have conversations with people, and just have as many people on to show that like deconstruction is not a result of bad discipleship at all.
Hmm.
Like, it's actually people who are some of the most genuine people of faith I've ever met, that because they want to explore, they want to be curious and to follow Jesus in ways that are not just nodding and agreeing and showing up to Bible studies for the cupcakes. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's,
Right.
at least, you know, whenever I was a youth pastor, that's how we got them there, you know, or pizza, you know, like, uh,
Pizza on Wednesdays. Yeah.
always
I
pizza.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. And I think about the apostles and how when Jesus greeted them and were like, "Hey, follow me," there some of them dropped what they were doing and went.
Right.
Others were like, "Bruh, hold up.
Yep.
Like, I got stuff to do, like busy, like what's going on or what's this about, you know?" And I could see myself in parts of the Bible as I was learning it. Like, I could see myself as Pharaoh saying, "No, I'm not going to let this go. I'm going to hold on to this until frogs, you know, are
Yeah.
raining down on me. And I don't care. I'm still going to hold on to this,"
Right.
you know? So, like, I could see myself in different people at the Bible. And it wasn't until the day that I saw myself as Jesus that I, I was completely convinced I was on the right path. It
Mm,
really, truly, I wasn't sure.
mm,
I knew that I was experiencing something different. I knew that my heart was opening. I knew that so what happened there was I went to one of those spiritual places had opened up in our little bubble that we live in our town. And they sell smudge sticks and tarot
yeah.
cards and, you know, all the stuff. I brought with me a book by Richard Rohr, and I said, I would like to teach this book here. I would like to do a Bible study here with this book being the basis of it. So we can talk about, you know, some of the magic that's in the world that's out there. And don't you ever use the word magic around Christian people, because they do not
Woo.
like that.
No, they
But
don't. No.
this woman is open to that. So I knew I could speak her language, and I knew that I could get through to her and head off teenagers who maybe were going to try to use their own power of discernment as opposed to relying on the universal power of discernment and
Yeah.
going the path that I've since learned to be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I knew I could head them off in a way. And anyway, she was open to it. And I was like, great. So I posted on my Facebook, "Hey, we're going to do a Bible study of the Scripture Roar, Universal Christ, come to, you know," and my church flipped out. They
Really?
were like, "We have a problem. We need to make sure you're okay. We need to have a talk and just make sure everything's okay." You know, I think they were concerned. It's the name of the store is like New Age or something like
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
And they have stuff about chakras, which I don't, that doesn't bother me. Like, none of
Right.
that stuff bothers me. I don't understand. I do some of the like witchcraft stuff I get a little icked out about, because I'm like, well, whose power are you relying on? Like,
Uh-huh.
when it comes to that. But um I still, my church was a little, they were freaked out, and I felt like I was in trouble. and I have gotten a finger wag because of it. So I know what you're
Yeah, yeah,
saying, where it's very difficult because there's terminology you can't use. Like one day in Sunday school, I said, "Oh, so he hallucinated an angel, and now we're supposed to go with this thinking." And
yeah.
then they're like, "He didn't hallucinate. That was a vision." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry, a vision. He had a vision."
Sure.
I, I'm like, potato, potato.
Right.
But to some people, and I've since learned that to go with grace in these situations,
Yeah.
because you don't you don't need to use that terminology if it's going to freak somebody out, you know.
Yeah.
um so I think, if you go and approach your dad, or have you learned that too, how to approach people?
Yeah, that's something that I really had to learn. I really had to understand how to have patience, how to move in peace, how to seek, try to
Peace.
find, yeah, yeah, being a
Yeah.
person of peace, I think
Yeah.
is some of the most, and a lot of these conversations, just thinking about incorporating Jesus into a reconstructed faith, I've really, what brought me back in a lot of ways, there's a lot of things, but one main one is the simplicity of Jesus' teachings and values that are actually wildly complex and take a lifetime to
Mm.
really try to model, and to follow. Whenever I was really into just theology and getting all my doctrines in order and everything, like, yeah, okay, love your neighbor as yourself, fine. What about this or that, and
Yeah.
now it's like the simple
Love
things,
your neighbor as your yes,
right?
yes.
Like,
Like
what
it's like
does
that's
that mean?
huge. Yeah,
Right,
it's so huge.
like, or
Right.
like came into the world not to condemn the world, like, okay,
Hmm.
so wow, like, it's the simple value systems, and that is, I think, universally true for religions, is that they the simple truths of them are the most difficult and the hardest, and it's actually easier to get into intricate details of difference.
Hmm.
That's a much lower
So
hanging fruit.
yeah, so Neil deGrasse Tyson has a masterclass, and I just watched it, and he said that wisdom is um is just like the condensed version of the truth without the details.
Mm,
And so I'm like, you're right. It is. There's no details. Like if you listen to some of the stuff Jesus says, it's like the mustard seed, and then you learn little details. You're like, oh well, the mustard seed's the biggest plant in the garden. Like it
yeah,
makes the biggest plant, and that's what church will tell you. But then when you start waking or leaning into your spirit, there are so many other things that he said in that just tiny little example about so like I'll give you an example of that is with my daughter having autism. There, have you seen a picture of a neuron? It looks
yeah,
like a tree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So we wear that as our crosses now, like because Jesus died on a tree. The idea that he would even, be put on a tree is just crazy to me.
yeah,
Like they could have just killed him so fast. The procession being like a king's procession,
yeah,
that's crazy to me too. And like crazy in a good way, the things that
yeah,
spark curiosity, like, wait, he really did have a king's procession through town. And
yeah,
then yeah, they could have just killed him. Like, why did they put him on a tree? And why were there two other people there, like a symbol of a yes person and a symbol of a no person? And then
yeah,
so I think the Bible in itself I can never get rid of because it's so nuanced on so many levels. Like sometimes I even think that there's some science hidden in there that we haven't even found yet. Like
yeah,
I was reading something in Job and it said, "Do you know the measuring string that I use to measure the earth?" And I'm
yeah.
thinking string theory. And then he said, "Do you know what the cornerstone of those are?" And I'm thinking, no, we haven't figured out that yet. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So when I got
String theory
curious,
is so rad too, by the way. But yes.
like when I got curious, it was because of stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
And the other thing Neil deGrasse Tyson said was to spark curiosity in people. So not only come to them with grace, but if we can spark a curiosity in them,
Mm.
like these kids that are into doing tarot cards and all of
Yeah.
the astrology or whatever.
Oracle
If
cards and yeah.
yeah, yeah. If I could spark their curiosity from that level, like, let me tell you, you could be possibly prophetic. Maybe you could astroplane. Maybe,
Yeah.
you know, like all the things Ram Dass talks about. Like,
Right.
have you checked out this guy? Like, he's
Yeah.
talking about some, you know, these are things that they just haven't been introduced to them. And from the church's perspective, we haven't done a good job talking to our young kids, because they are being told about Wicca, and they're being told about, you know, all those things that I mentioned before. And I'm not trying to put like smudging your house in the same group as that, because I did mention that before, and I know that's an ancient tradition, and that is a form of prayer, and that
Yeah.
I don't have any problems with that. I just think that the path of giving it up to a higher power is the true path,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
being able to surrender. And you know, sometimes like I've told my nieces when they've had one of my nieces, when she's like, I just can't do it all by myself. I was like, honey, Jesus didn't even carry the cross all by himself. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have to. And she's like, what? And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, look it up.
Yeah.
And so then they're like,
That's so
whoa.
good. That's so good. And people need, like, we were talking about some with a friend yesterday about some of this stuff, and about how we put so much weight on ourselves to have to figure it out, or to be perfect, or to do all of these things, and we forget. And I think it's the over glorification of trying to be perfect, and we have this sort of like Greco-Roman influence that's like everything is
Hmm.
supposed to be perfect, and these statues of perfection and all of this, and the
Yeah.
modern day statue of perfection is Instagram and filters and all
Filters.
this stuff. And we feel that sort of weight, and it's a sort of weight to be. And I think that we do have divinity within us, but the higher divinity that we submit to, it's us trying to be in that space, and it's a weight that's really crushing. And the church kind of perpetuates some of that in a way, because we
Yeah.
just we don't allow people to have their own personal expressions or forms, and we have very rigorous, like, there's this unspoken rule in law, like, you can't talk about Ram Dass in church. Are you crazy? In the same way that like social media influencers have their unspoken rules of what is perfect and what is best practices, the church does too. And I think it's like a lot of deconstruction and reconstruction is like, well, what can we implement as being normal, quote, best practices for people to have real, true faith, real, true, like a sense of knowing that they are in tune with the Father. I know. So once again, I have to like pull myself out of using that sort of language. But Jesus says, "I only
Mm-hmm.
can see what my Father in heaven is doing." What avenues are we giving people? Like what you're saying, you could be a prophetic person.
Yeah.
You could be in tune with the infinite Father and what's happening
Hmm.
in this, if we'll just have a discipline and practice in this way.
Yeah.
So I'm
Right. Discipline.
excited to see what this
Yeah.
looks like in the future. I'm excited to see people like yourself who are grounded in a church, but yet pressing forward on other opportunities for people to understand who they are in God. We need that really bad,
Yeah.
because we
Right.
don't do good at it in Western church.
No, we don't let people be who they're going to be. And so then the pendulum swings up in opposition to a hard opposition. And then they don't even know who they are at some point.
Right. And what
But
do you
there's
do
just,
in that? Like, so as we wrap up some, like, I'm curious, like, what words do you tell people that are in a sort of deconstruction, or that are in a place of identity loss?
yeah.
Like, what, from your experience, like, what's some of the ways that you've learned that through yourself or through people that you've been walking with?
Okay, that is like the $1,000,000 question. That's a daily journey, like my identity as a female, for instance, like I stopped dyeing my hair and now I have my gray hairs coming out. Very hard to do in this
Mm,
society. You don't think that's hard, but you realize that that was an identity, a false identity that I was presenting to the world, that I have my fake eyelashes on, because my hair's falling out. Like,
mm,
so as a woman, our identity is in our outwardly beauty, but as my inwardly beauty is growing, I'm able to get rid of some of the things that I used to identify myself as.
mm.
And, one of them being someone with really nice hair, or, that is something for women. But I think honestly, there's no answer for that. Like, what do you
Mhm.
do for people who are struggling with an identity crisis? I just say the spirit. What is this? Like Muji says, when you look on the inside, looking at the person asking the question. So the person looking at the person asking the question, what does that person's hair look like?
Mm,
Or does that person need to present themselves in this way? And it's like, no, that person doesn't, because that's the spirit, right?
mhm. Yeah,
So if you're walking in the spirit, the identity doesn't matter very much.
yeah, yeah,
But that's an
yeah.
everyday thing. That's part of that's staying the path. Like,
The
you can't grow
practice.
weary.
Yes, yes. And it's a narrow path. I think that's another like thing that's been skewed in so much in so many ways. Like a narrow path is something that it's difficult. It's something that is hard to walk, and the spiritual path is. And we're not talking about people who have raised their hands, at church services, who are on the narrow path.
Yeah.
It's a path means something that you are walking on. It's not
Yeah.
something that you've arrived to. People forget about that. So to walk a narrow path takes a level of awareness, consciousness,
Yeah. It's a
trust.
decision every day. Every day. It's to
Yes,
make the decision to walk the path
yes, the
and to shed
intentionality.
identity.
Yes, yes, and the ego always wants to come in and distort that, change that, and that's where I think the flesh and the spirit, as Paul would talk about it's this trying to um, navigate that on a daily basis. I think is so crucial, and for people that are reconstructing their faith in some way,
Mhm.
I think it's like, to me, like the reason that we wanted to start a church again is, to me, like holding a space like what that gentleman was saying, and about the benefits of the church. It's like there that's where I've met and encountered the living presence of God. Obviously in other places too, but I was introduced to it largely in those sort of settings, in worship settings and times of stillnesses. And luckily the church tradition that I come from, the guy that that really founded it, was a Quaker before that, which is all about silence and sitting
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of that. So that's a very much in flow with my where I'm ordained, is stillness, quietness, worship, all of this stuff. But
Yeah.
people have to engage and encounter the spirit of the living God in some way, I think, in order to reconstruct a faith. And that could be me projecting. That's what it's been for me. The way that I've reconstructed and reoriented my life with Jesus is familiar. I see him in new lenses and new ways. But more so than anything, it's the spirit of God that brings illumination, and it brings a sort of devotion. Just
Yeah.
memorizing the verses and getting the doctrines and doing the stuff
Yeah.
doesn't hold weight. It's the
Mm.
spirit of the living God that
Yeah.
makes things alive. And so,
And
yeah,
to talk to you just real quick, I know we probably need to wrap up, but you think about John the Baptist being born having the Spirit already upon him. And then
yeah,
you think about Jesus having the Spirit come upon him later at the baptism with John the Baptist. And then when you, when you sit with that for a while, you realize that it was because he had to know what it would be like to live without the Spirit upon you and live with the Spirit upon you,
mm,
and the differences that that would make in order for him to proceed. Like John the Baptist, born with it, It
Yeah.
says it, he was already born with it. Could you imagine already being born with it?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Because we wouldn't
Right.
have had so many problems,
Yeah.
keeping our
That's a
keeping our
really
faith and staying on the
interesting
path.
that is a really interesting point. So what I think I hear you saying is like Jesus knew what life was like. And this is something I talk to people a lot about is the over deification of Jesus. Like in
Mhm.
our world, like we say, Jesus is God, and you throw that around a lot. Jesus is human, and we forget that it was a heresy in the 400s to think that Jesus was only God. Like it's
Yeah.
100% God,
Yeah.
100% man. And it's like, to me, what I hear you saying is, correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, or if I'm just going on something here. So like prior to that baptism, knew what life, how that was just before being born from above, until he
Mhm.
himself was born from above by way of John the
Born again.
Baptist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never made that connection. That is so cool.
Don't say that at church, though.
Right, because then be like, well, he was
They're not gonna
12 and
like
they
that.
forgot him, with all the priests and rabbis. And it's like,
Well, they're gonna say, no, he's God. He always
right,
had the Spirit. And I'm like, no, read Luke. Read it.
right.
Luke. It says
Yeah.
it. So we studied Luke at church. Totally skipped over that part. I said, hold up, we need to talk about this. Like, this was important.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, not important.
I
They're always telling me to be quiet. But whatever.
Hey, if you ever want to move to San Diego and come hang out at what we're doing, I'd love that.
We'll start a church.
Yeah, if we'll
Yeah,
ever be able to actually really meet again, we'll see here
we
in
will. I think so.
California.
I think
It's
so.
wild. Uh,
Yeah, it is.
that is so cool. That
Yeah, dig into that this week. So that's my homework as a Bible study leader. I give people homework. Like, that's the homework for the week. Like, just think about that. Sit in that. Read it again. It's in Luke, first few chapters.
yeah,
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 pretty cool.
because that's when the heavens open and the Spirit comes on the Jesus at baptism, implying that it wasn't there before that. That is so cool.
And when it
Wow.
comes upon you, it's the same way. It
Yes.
literally happens the exact same way. It's like chains are broken. You feel like a dove has landed on
Yes.
you. You're
Yes.
soaring. And that happened to me over water running over my hands. Not that
And
first time,
that brings up
but
something else that like it's people needed to then be scared of the trial in the desert that comes after that. After that, he went to the
yes.
desert for
Oh,
40 days,
yeah.
and the devil, which actually I thought this was really cool. The actual translation is more of the devil being more of like ego in a way, like, and it's this sort of like, so the way that,
De-evaluing.
yes, yes.
Or
Wow.
de-evolving. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
de-evolving. It's the lower self. It's the
Mhm.
other whatever it is in our psyche that is trying to, steal, kill, and destroy, right? It's these
Yeah.
things. And it's like,
I love
yeah,
it.
so good. And it's like
Right?
people, like, if any encouragement for listeners, like, to not be fearful or surprised, like, when Peter says, don't be surprised when fiery trials come or whatever. It's like we do get a little surprised. And that's why I say, not that it's like a level of more or less, but people that are seeking, that are deconstructing, that are reevaluating faith, like, to not be surprised. Like, you're probably a person who has way more to offer the faith than people who just check the box and go to worship and do the thing and write the tithe and have the nice Bible study. And, like, you probably have a lot more to contribute if you just stay in the pathway, even though it's hard and difficult and dismal. Just
Yeah.
continue to move one foot in front of the other and seek and search, and you will find. Jesus promises that. Knock, and the door will be
Teresa,
open,
yeah,
you know?
Teresa of Avila, when she talks about the castles, the internal castles, the sixth castle, she just is constantly saying how she's like, there are periods where she doesn't even know if God exists.
Yeah.
Hello, she's in the final chapters of her path. That's
Yes.
how hard stuff will hit you.
Yes.
But
Yes.
so he'll always finish a good work that he started within you, right?
That's
And
right.
so until completion, as it says in is it Romans that says that? So the work that he started within, until completion, he'll continue the good your good works, right? So you can't be afraid, because it
Right.
doesn't matter. Let's say you get it wrong today. Let's say you do something and you're like, that devalued me or brought me to a lower energy field or source. Well, he's not going to stop. He's always coming, and you're not going to stop, because once you've had a taste or this love affair, you can't,
Right.
and they refer to it as like a marriage in the Bible. And I always thought that was so creepy. I'm like, ugh, being married to God? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
that's creepy. And, but when you fall in love, I mean, like, I'm married to this. Like, this is the rest of
Yes.
my life. Like, even though I'll have days where I'm like, Oprah says this sometimes, like, Lord, don't teach me nothing today.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you'll have days
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. And but it's that sort of
Seeking you.
discipline and practice of
Hmm. Yeah.
continuing and to not
Stay
be
in the word.
discouraged. Yeah.
Stay in the word. Stay in
Well,
the word. Stay in the word.
but if people in that, to me, I took some years away from the word, and I took some years to, because I needed a recalibration. I need a
Hmm.
system recal, and it sounds to me like you have a very connectedness to your spirit, to the spirit. And for me, I didn't. I've always been connected, but there was a time where that took the back burner. Experiential faith took the back burner to logos faith, and
Hmm.
understanding that. And because
Yeah.
of that, I read so much into the scriptures because I was obsessed with Calvinism and the reformers that I
Oh,
had to, yeah, I was
wow.
majorly tulip all the way, total
Wow.
depravity, like all that,
Wow. Okay.
limited atonement, God only, the frozen chosen, all of that for a period of time. And I needed a major break,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
clean break from the scriptures. And what's so beautiful to me is that it's it's the Holy Spirit that reveals the Holy Scriptures, not the other way
Hmm.
around. and
Right.
and
True. That's true.
because when we sometimes we through my seeking in Eastern religion about clinging and attachments, I clung and attached to an image of God that was the Bible, and
Mhm.
I took that as God, right,
Oh,
instead of
wow.
it be God. So
You need to do a podcast on that.
yeah, that'd be cool. I should
Yeah.
do that. I
Yeah.
should write that
Because
down.
because people cling to the image of Jesus in that way. Like,
Yeah.
even in my Bible study, I have a hard time with some people who are like, I'll just think of the image of Jesus and then I feel better. I'm like, the white guy with the blue eyes, or like,
Yeah.
what's it look like? Or they'll say things like, I'm working towards being a saint. And I'm like, well, what does a saint look like? Like
Good,
that.
good,
Like,
good question. Yeah. Uh, so for
that could be
me,
a podcast.
I
I
think
like
it
that.
could be. I'm gonna definitely riff on that. Or like I told told the guest that I was recording with earlier, I'm gonna be more intentional about not just riffing all the time and actually gather my thoughts. But if you're familiar with the Enneagram at all, I'm an Enneagram 7. And so I'm the enthusiast, and I just get enthusiastic about something and just kind of rant about it.
That's
And
good.
it's a discipline for me to like formulate my thoughts, because even if I formulate the thoughts, the odds of me sticking to those formulated thoughts is few and far between.
That's good.
But I had to take a break from the Bible because it was the
Okay.
image of God instead of it. It served as a
Yeah.
sign. So, but what's amazing and why the Spirit is alive, and the word, only people say the word's alive, only alive by way of the Spirit that brings the illumination to it. And so
Mhm.
what came to me after taking a couple of years away from devoted reading, um, I started to be reminded of the words of Jesus at random times. Like I would be doing something or having a conversation with someone, and I would find myself like reinterpreting a parable to someone, and I'm like,
Yes.
I don't
Where's
like,
that come from?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's weird. And the person was like deeply moved by this. And I'm like, oh, and this is just like, Jesus' greatest hits, like, and
Yeah.
I'm just like riffing
Jesus
on that.
101.
Yeah. And So
Yeah.
that drew me back to the Bible. And then I had to really start in the Gospels because I tried to jump back into
Mhm.
Paul, and I just wasn't ready for that, because the Reformed tradition of Christianity, they worship Jesus, but they really follow Paul. Paul is their
Yeah,
guy.
Paul's their guy, man. But
And that was me.
he was a sinner, and not everything he says might be right. Like
Exactly.
you have to understand. I'm not going to say everything right all the time.
Yeah.
Jesus was the only one who was able to say everything right all the time.
Yeah.
But to go back to the reason why I say stay in scripture is because it will help you discern truth from fiction in the way that Jesus did it. So remember when you talked about being tested by the devil, all of the things that he used was from Deuteronomy.
Yes.
So he used those things to combat, the thinking inside of the head that goes on that tries to devalue you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do know your scripture, you do have a stronger foothold against something coming to take, steal, kill. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's the only reason why I say that, just
Yeah.
from learning from his example, that if you do know, it's better.
It
It's
is
better
good.
to know.
Well, because there is words of life, and those are the words of truth. And I believe that, for any seeking person, Jesus, the words of Jesus, like, and here's my pastor side of me, like, they're not going to return void. Like, it is not going to return void. Like, when we
Right.
have that deep, like, for me, it did not return void for me. It was planted deep in my heart. And whenever the moment came time for it to become alive, it returned in a beautiful, impactful way for me and everyone around me, and it was only
That's the
because
seed.
I was obsessed with the Bible, man.
Yeah. No, dude.
Obsessed,
No, okay, same. But that's part of my love affair. That's what happened.
Yeah.
That began my love affair, just
Yeah.
becoming obsessed with the Bible. Like, what is it trying to tell us? Is this psychology? This is science? Like, just anything and everything I could get my hands on that was Bible related, I was
Yeah.
digesting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
It's really
So we
good.
kind of had the same journey.
Yeah,
Kind of in a
absolutely.
weird.
In different ways. Yeah. Yeah. So luckily you were spared the reformed exploration,
Yeah.
so, uh,
Yeah. It
yeah,
tries to catch me. It still does, though. It's still, to say I was spared, some of those things still try to get at me sometimes. It's a constant work.
their influence, sadly, a lot of the
Their
influence
influence
is
is big. Yeah.
very big. People don't even realize how a lot of that is dominated in Western Christianity, especially evangelicalism, in a lot of ways. So, well, I'm going to wrap up the episode, but I just want to say thank you, Jessica, so much
Yeah. It's
for
fun.
carving out time on your Friday afternoon to chat with me. And I love
Yeah.
just having people on the podcast. And I'm so excited. We have a bunch of these that I'm doing, and I think people are really going to be able to resonate with your story. And I'm excited to hear all the
Oh,
feedback
okay.
from it. And
Good. Good.
so
I hope to
thank you.
help. I hope it helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It helps so much. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for carving
Absolutely.
out time. So
Yeah.
good. So, um, yeah, are you, is there anything anywhere that people like, if they want to, do you do any blog writing or anything, or any creative
No.
work?
No. I paint. I do woodworking. I'm a bit like Muji used to do stained glass. Did you know that?
I did
Like back
not.
in the day. Yeah.
Really?
Could you imagine owning a stained glass? I do some stained glass.
Really?
Um, yeah, I don't sell. I just raise my babies,
I
and
love
I
that.
love on them. And but so just where I would say is I did write down where I am now, like the Psalms
Yeah.
became important to me for some reason. And writing lamentations where like I'm just like
Mm,
writing it all out, like, oh, I just feel like garbage about this, and just like, Lord, why can't you just be here right now instead of me seeking, and doing those types of things. And don't worry, you're not going to scare God with whatever you have to say. you
totally.
know that will help anybody on this journey. It's a lonely journey.
Yeah.
um that podcast, the Turning to the Mystics, was really good for me because he does mention how lonely the journey gets, and
Yeah.
how because you're going to outgrow the people who are giving you wisdom.
Yep.
Or they'll move away, or they'll outgrow you, or
Yeah.
something's going to happen. So it's that part is always going to be changing. So don't be sad if it becomes lonely, and but just rely on the Father a little bit more. I guess that's what I would have liked to have heard during what was deconstruction. I didn't even know there was a word for it, but what was happening to me. Yeah,
it's really good and
that's
beneficial.
And we're scared for the death of whatever we're going to lose, but sometimes we just don't believe that the thing on the other side is better than what we have now.
Yeah.
And it's not true. The thing on the other side is always better. Yeah. Oh, there's a part in Nemo, and the fish are like falling down the whale's mouth, and he says, she said, he says to let go, and the one fish says, but how do you know something bad's not going to happen? And then she says, you don't.
Yes. I love that. I love that wisdom. I have a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old that's almost 7. So all of those movies and all those cartoons are profound. I love that.
Yeah. I can't sum it up any better than that.
That's
you don't.
What a beautiful way. What a beautiful way to end this. You don't know, but those that go before us show us that there is a way, there is beauty, and there is rebirth.
And they get out, right? And then that was the whole opening to where he found his son. So yeah, that's right. That was so good. I love that part.
I love it. I love it. I could talk all day. This is so fun.
No kidding, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like, when Jesus would draw the fish in the sand and someone would come up to him and like draw a fish also. Like, I feel like that's what's happening. Like, you get it. You get it. Like,
yeah.
I don't have to like word things in a weird way. Like, I can just say what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yes.
That's how I feel. Like, maybe we need some kind of like code word for like people deconstructing. Like, hey, are you deconstructing? I don't know.
Yeah. There is like a sense that you get about people that you talk to, that like, is there an in or not? There's like a feeling that you kind of get.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right. Are they
take
open
some finesse
to this?
though.
Yeah. Sometimes I usually just say something really weird, and then if they're like, "Oh, I get that," and if you say you're prophetic, and they're like, "Oh, cool, tell me more."
Yeah.
Okay, they might be deconstructing, or
yes.
Not that I use being prophetic often. I don't.
That they're open. They're open to more spiritual things.
Yes.
Like it's not as like cut and dry. So so good. Well, thank you so much, and I will definitely be in touch and let you know if anybody reaches out with any particular questions about the conversation, and it'll be good. I love it. Thank you so much for being on.
No problem.
So fun.